This is my last video covering chapter 4, where we're going to see how to actually use the quadratic formula to solve and get some solutions. So if you haven't already gotten introduced to the quadratic formula, make sure you step back to the first 4.4 video where I introduce it and go over how to use it to just figure out how many solutions an equation is going to have. So quick refresher, our quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, make sure all of that's in your root, all over 2a. All right, so let's just start solving some stuff. So if we want to solve, say, 2x squared minus 6x minus 8 equals 0. So first thing you want to do, and I'm going to break this down into more steps than it really deserves. Step 1 is just to make sure that it's exactly set up the way it needs to be. So make sure it's in the right form. So it's got to be in standard form. You've got to make sure everything's on the same side. So just take a look at it, make sure it all seems good. In this case, it's fine. Step 2, which again, not even really a step, is to figure out what A, B, and C are. So looking at our original equation, we've got A is 2, B is negative 6, and C is negative 8. Now that we've got our numbers, we're going to take them and we're just going to put them into the formula. So we're going to input our numbers into the formula. Being really careful to not mess up our negatives. So we've got x equals negative b, so that's negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b, which again is negative 6, squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, and times c, which is negative 8. And then all of that over 2a, so that's 2 times 2. All right, so we've plugged everything in. We've got some simplifying to do, so we're not going to get right to the solving just yet, but we want to just kind of make this as neat as we can before we go too far into it. So next step is just going to be to simplify. So running through this, negative 6, right? Those two negatives are going to cancel out, and we're just going to get positive 6, plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared, which is 36, and then minus 4 times 2 times negative 8. So that's going to be negative 8 times negative 8, so we're going to get plus 64 in there. And then underneath that, we're going to get 4. We can go a little further with this, so we're still going to leave that as 6, plus or minus the square root of 100, once we add those, also over 4. And then depending on whether this is a root that you can do cleanly or not, sometimes you're going to stop here, sometimes you're going to go a little further. In this case, since square root of 100 is a really nice one, we're just going to do that. And so we'll get x is 6 plus or minus 10 over 4. All right, so now that we've simplified everything we can, we are now going to split this into two solutions using that plus minus sign. So we're going to split into 2 and then simplify a little bit further and get ourselves some answers. So our first solution is going to use the plus, so 6 plus 10 over 4. And our second solution is going to use the minus, so 6 minus 10 over 4. So 6 plus 10 gets me 16. And 16 divided by 4 gets me 4. So that's my first solution. And then for the other one, 6 minus 10 gets me negative 4. And then negative 4 divided by negative 4 gets me negative 1. And there we are. We have solved. We're done. There's really nothing else to do for this one. So you notice there wasn't a whole lot of difficult thinking that had to go into that. It's mostly just you read the numbers in, you plug them into the formula, and then you just do a whole bunch of calculations. So this method is really great in that you don't have to think too hard about what you're doing. It is a lot of work, so we could have actually solved this one by factoring in probably 15 seconds without having to go through all of those calculations. But for ones where you can't factor nicely, this one is a really great strategy. So let's try another one. So we've got x squared plus 13x plus 10 equals 0. And so this one's not factorable. So to speed up our process a bit, I'm not going to go through and write down A, B, and C, for example. What I'll often do is I'll just underneath this, I'll do this. That's A, that's B, and that's C. And you might be saying to yourself, hey, there's nothing in front of that x squared. But remember, if there's no coefficient in front of something, the coefficient is just 1. All right, so let's start plugging stuff in. I do recommend, until you've really gotten the hang of this formula, that you kind of write out the generic form every time you do a question. It's just going to help you internalize it, and you'll memorize it a little bit faster. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we plug some stuff in. B is, in this case, 13, so that's going to be negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 13 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is 10. And all of that is going to be all over 2 times 1. All right, so again, we've got some simplifying we can do here. So the negative 13 is just going to stay as is. Inside the root, 13 squared is 169, and 4 times 1 times 10 is 40, and then 2 times 1 is obviously 2. Do try not to just plug this whole thing into your calculator in one go. In my experience, it's technically doable with most calculators, but it's really easy to mess up, and by and large, people who do it wrong. So try not to just go straight into plugging it all in. Simplify it first. You're way more likely to get it right if you do it that way. All right, so we've got negative 13 plus or minus. Inside that root, we are now going to have 129, and this is all over 2. And so we don't want to do root 129 right now. If we do that, we're going to have to round early, and our answer is going to get worse and worse and worse. So we want to keep it as a root until we absolutely have no choice. So we're going to take these, and we're going to split them up now. So we're going to have x is negative 13 plus that root over 2, and x is negative 13 minus that root over 2. So if we wanted exact value solutions, right, this is an exact value. So there will be times where maybe this is just where we stop. We've got 2 solutions, we're good. But if we don't want exact values, we want decimals, we're going to now go one step further and get ourselves some decimal answers. To do that, be really careful plugging this into your calculator. So go ahead and actually pause the video here, try plugging this into your calculator, and see what you get. There's a decent chance you might get it wrong, so see if you can plug this in properly. All right, so what you should have gotten for the first one was negative 0.82, and for the second one was negative 12.18. Typically, we're going to go to 2 decimal places for me, by the way. If you didn't get those, so if, for example, for that first one, you got, let me see what the incorrect answer would have been. If you got negative 7 instead of negative 0.8, it's because you didn't plug the thing into the calculator properly. So negative 13 plus root 129 divided by 2. This is how a lot of people are going to plug this in, and that's not right. So we want to make sure we're dividing that entire numerator by 2, which means you either want to do this first thing and get an answer and then divide, or you got to make sure to use brackets. One way or another, you need to make sure this is going into your calculator properly so that you can get the right answers. Right, so let's try another one. So we're going to do negative 2x squared plus 10x minus 12 equals 0. So try this one out for yourselves. Go ahead and run through it. See what you get. You should get nice, clean answers on this one. There shouldn't be any decimals. So pause here and come back once you're done. All right, so moving through this one a little bit faster. We've got x is negative b, so negative 10 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 10 squared minus 4, times negative 2, times negative 12, all over 2 times negative 2. So negative 10 plus or minus, and that's going to be 100 minus 96, not 100 plus 96. Be really careful with your negatives there. Divided by negative 4. Which is going to be negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 4 over negative 4. And so don't split it up here, right? People get into a habit of splitting without thinking, but 4 is a square root you can do. So this is negative 10, just plus or minus the square root of 2 over negative 4. So now we want to split. So our two solutions are going to be x is negative 10 plus 2 over negative 4, which is going to work out to being 2, or x is negative 10 minus 2 over negative 4, which is going to work out to being 3. All right, we're going to do just a few more, just to talk about a few specific edge cases that you might run into. So if we had, for example, 3x squared minus 24x plus 20 equals negative 35. If you're going to do this one, you'll hopefully notice that that 35 is in the wrong spot. We don't like having anything other than a 0 over there. So the first thing we need to do here is to add 35 to both sides. So we've got to make sure that equals to 0. So once you've done that, you end up with 3x squared minus 24x plus 55 equals 0. All right, so go ahead and do the rest of this one yourself and come back and we'll talk about it once you're done. So we've got x is negative 24, so that's just going to be positive 24, plus or minus the square root of negative 24 squared minus 4 times 3 times 55, all over 2 times 3. And so if we simplify this, we're going to notice that something's going to be a little off about this one. So we've got 24 plus or minus, that's 596, not 579. And 4 times 3 times 55 is going to be 660. And specifically, that's going to be minus 660. All over 6. And so if you do that subtraction inside your bracket, you end up with negative 84. And so you hopefully, when you were doing this yourself, stopped here and said to yourself, oh, hey, something's wrong here. When I watched the last video, or when I saw this in class, I remember hearing something about negatives and roots. And so remember, if you've got a negative inside your root as your final discriminant, you don't have any solutions. So this particular equation has no solutions because your discriminant is negative. So you really got to watch out for those. They're not going to be just highlighted for you. You got to catch them when they come up. Okay. On to the next one. So you're going to solve this one, and you'll notice again something should very immediately seem a little off here. We've only got 2 terms. It's not a difference of squares, so we can't solve it by factoring. We could solve it using opposite operations, but if we're stuck on using quadratic formula for whatever reason, we got to think about this a little bit. So this is obviously a, and then this 30 here, you got to ask yourself, is this a b or is it a c? And so keep in mind, the b is always the coefficient for your x value, but we don't have an x here, so this is actually c. b is 0 because it's just not there. So when we plug stuff in, that's actually going to make the quadratic formula a little bit simpler. So we got x is negative b, well that's just negative 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared, and then minus 4 times negative 30, all over 2 times 4. Being careful with those negatives, if you simplify all that stuff inside the root, you're going to end up with just root 480, and outside of the root now we've just got plus or minus 8. So our 2 solutions are either x is root 480 divided by 8, or x is negative root 480 divided by 8. So if you calculate those, you're going to get 2.74 or negative 2.74. All right, so one application question just to give you a sense of how those might look. So we have, for example, a firework. You might have questions with balls, with rockets, with arrows, with whatever. So a firework is going to follow an arc through an air, or through the air, that's given by this quadratic function. H of t equals negative 0.02 t squared plus 3t plus 7. So h is the height after t seconds. Specifically in meters. And so the thing about the quadratic formula is, since it is so brainless, you are going to run into cases a lot where you're going to have to deal with a lot of decimals, because you don't have to do a whole lot of work with them, you just got to calculate them. So the first thing I'm going to ask you about this is, how long did it take for the firework to be 5 meters in the air? So you got to think about that. If I say 5 meters, I'm giving you not a time value, but a height value, right? That is a distance. So that is me telling you that h of t equals 5. So we go into our equation here, and we're going to replace h of t with 5, because that's what you were given. All right, so this is something we can solve now. So go ahead, try solving it. You should get an answer, see what you come up with, and we'll talk about it. I will warn you, the answer on this one is not going to make a ton of sense logistically. Just ignore it and accept that it's a number. All right, so if we want to solve this, we're going to start by subtracting 5 on both sides. We're going to get negative 0.02 t squared plus 3t, and then plus 2 now. So if we go through and solve this, so we're going to get t equals, not x equals, negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times that negative 0.02 times 2, all over 2 times negative 0.02. So we go through and we calculate this now. So we'll have a negative 3 plus or minus, and all of that stuff inside the root is going to simplify to 9.16. And then all of that over negative 0.04. So our two solutions are either going to be t is negative 3 plus root 9.16 over negative 0.04, or t is negative 3 minus root 9.16. all over negative 0.04. And so the solutions you get from those are negative 0.66 or 150.66. The negative answer doesn't work. You can't have negative time. The positive answer is pretty unreasonable. That's 2.5 minutes. That's a pretty long time for a firework to be in the air, but we're just going to have to run with it because that is what came up, and it is a number. So it was 5 meters in the air after 150 seconds. Follow-up question to this, something else I want you to think about, is how high was this firework when it was first fired? Oops, sorry. Try that again. How high was the firework when it was first fired? So what does that mean, when it was fired? What am I telling you when I tell you that? So I'm not telling you a distance, I'm not telling you a height, because I'm asking you to find a height. I'm telling you a time. So when something is first fired, well, that's at the beginning. That's at t equals 0. And so we're going to go into that, and we're just going to replace t with 0. So we're doing h of 0 now instead of h of t. And that equals negative 0.02 times 0 squared plus 3 times 0 plus 7. It's a whole bunch of zeros that are all going to cancel out, and so we're just going to end up with 7. And so our answer is 7 meters. It was 7 meters when it was fired. And there you are. So that is the quadratic formula, and that is quadratic equations in general. So if there's anything from this chapter that you're feeling a little bit iffy on, make sure you go back and rewatch some of those videos. And in the next chapter, we're going to learn how to deal with things called radicals.